Good morning, everybody. We have come to second series of the set of webinar series. In the first webinar series, we had about the myths and what is a PPE, how to prevent the infection and how to control the infection. So these were the first series of webinar, and the second webinar series tells you about the preparedness, what is the role of the nurse in this health facility, and what is about what about the ventilator management it says about, and how to conduct yourself as a nurse in the hospital, and about the mental health considerations. So as you know, today the PM has announced till 3rd May the lockdown. So Indian Nursing Council thought, let us do something for our nursing fraternity. So we could only educate. So we are educating you in how to take on with this COVID-19, which is a very new disease, which doesn't have a treatment or a vaccine as of now. So how to conduct yourself as a nurse in the hospital and to take care of the patient, we are going to tell you in detail. Now I'm introducing Dr. Premila Lee, who is a professor and nursing superintendent of CMC Vellore. She will she'll speak about health facility preparedness for novel coronavirus, that is COVID-19. Over to Dr. Premila Lee.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be with you all through this webinar. I thank Mr. Dilip and the entire INC team for organizing these sessions and also giving me an opportunity to be part of this. I bring greetings from CMC Vellore. Thank God for and also for my institution for enabling me to share this topic on health facility preparedness for patients acquiring coronavirus infection. In this session, we will learn about the preparedness both at the country level and as well as in the individual healthcare facility level. We are all aware that today COVID-19, the outbreak started in Wuhan in December 19, and today it has become a global pandemic and it's threatening the well-being of every country. Today the cases in fact has crossed 1.8 million deaths and more 1.8 million cases with death more than 1 lakh. Now in India also we have gone beyond 10,000 and we have more than 300 deaths. Now WHO has given some of the pillars to respond in terms of emergencies. So these pillars I'm not going to go in detail. That is country level coordination. I think as you go through the slides, you will realize now this is what is going on now all over the country with regard to COVID-19. Now there's a lot of country level coordination that happens. There's a lot of planning and monitoring, risk communication, engagement of the community through media, keeping them updated, educating them, surveillance, and the rapid response teams, their involvement, case investigations, and we are also looking at the point of entry, national laboratories, infection prevention and control in health facilities, and case management, and the last, the operational support and logistics. So what WHO has specified as eight pillars today that we are going to, today's session that we are going to talk about this 8th pillar. Now, as the number of cases increase, it is important for us to prepare the healthcare facility to use our resources judicially as well as to provide appropriate care to COVID-19 patients. So therefore, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has said there are 3 types of COVID dedicated facilities that are created. One is COVID Care Center. We will talk about it in detail later. Then dedicated COVID Health Center, and the third one is dedicated COVID Hospital. Now, COVID care center, this is mainly meant for mild or very mild or suspected cases. Now, there are a lot of interim facilities like hotels, hostels, schools, lodges can be used. Community health centers also can be used, but however, there are, if it is only absolutely necessary, they recommend that we use it, mainly because these community health centers also care for women as well as newborns. Now, in all three facilities, now you will see that repeatedly what is said is both confirmed COVID cases as well as the suspects have to be kept separately. That is something we need to remember. Next is the COVID. These COVID care centers, they should be attached to one of the dedicated COVID health center or with a dedicated COVID hospital for referral purpose. It may be one or it may be more than one of these facilities to be attached, because if patients, the individuals staying in COVID care centers, if they progress, they should be immediately shifted to any of the other centers. So therefore, there must be an ambulance available with for transportation with oxygen as well as BLS support facility available. Now, of course, allopathic doctors will man all three centers. However, to overcome the manpower crisis or to increase the need to meet that, for the COVID care centers, Ayush doctors have also been recommended. Now, there is a syllabus, there is a module which has been developed by, there's a training protocol that has been developed by AIIMS, is uploaded in Ministry of Health website. Now, Ministry of Ayush has carried out the training sessions, and they have list of people who have undergone these trainings, and such people can be sent to these centers and they will be guided by the allopathic doctors. Coming to dedicated COVID health centers. Now, these centers are meant to care for patients who are moderately ill. Now, this facility is available, it's made available either in the entire hospital or in a hospital, a separate block can be allocated. As I said earlier, because these block has to be away from the rest of the patient care area, or it has to be zoned so that the non-COVID patients do not have access to these areas. So one of that possible, either you have a separate entry or a zoning, whichever is feasible, that has to be done. Now again, this dedicated COVID care, COVID health centers, they have to be attached, or they have to be mapped to one of the dedicated COVID hospital for the same reason. If patient's condition progresses for a safe travel, so therefore the ambulance to be available with these facilities. Now, these patients, dedicated COVID hospital, now this facility is meant for patients who are clinically assigned to be severe. Now, mostly these patients who need ventilator support or ICU care. Now, dedicated COVID hospital also, as I said earlier, either an entire hospital or a separate block can be allocated for this purpose, to treat patients who are either COVID positive or patients who are suspected. Now, for all three facilities, both private and government facilities can be designated. Now, these COVID hospitals must have an ICU facility, adequate supply of oxygen, and also adequate ventilators to be available. Now, as I stated earlier, for both COVID care centers or dedicated COVID hospitals, COVID health centers, these hospitals serve as referral centers. Now, once again, I want to say that this is something which is, when you go through the document, which is said again and again, the suspects and confirmed cases have to be placed separately. Now, later when I talk about this, I will say how do we isolate these patients. Now, at this time, now there are certain priority of work which is there at the country level as well as in the individual facilities. Now, at the country level, I think it's already what is going on, like the emergency response mechanism has been activated. There is a communication, there's constant communication that happens with the public. So public is up to date with what is going on, and surveillance activities are rigorous, and they're able to identify cases and their contacts, they are traced and they are tested and they are managed appropriately. And meanwhile, we are also educating public about all over through media and various ways. You find there are educational activities that goes on, educating public about hand hygiene and coughing techniques and social distancing. So as we get ready, of course, as our facilities, as we prepare, it's not a one-time preparedness, because all of us, we know that is the indefinite nature of this illness, with this disease, that we continue to prepare ourselves. We continue to expand our preparations. So our priority at a hospital settings, we need to prepare to receive and manage cases, as well as the search. We need to increase our search capacity as the need arises. And I think the most vital, important component, that is the human resource management. How do we manage them? So now these are the two areas that I'm going to concentrate. Coming to facility preparedness, there are 9 aspects that we are going to discuss, which are listed down in these 2 slides. One is assessing the readiness of our health facility. Now, establish or reinforce the screening or the triage protocols, and to ensure that availability of basic emergency care for our patients, and develop a system to supply, procure, and to distribute plan for our vital items like PPE, ventilator, so on. And we also develop policies for visitor restriction, assess the capacity of the lab and then how to increase it, referral system readiness, as there is also, we talked about the referral services that happens in different centers. And we need to take care of the environment as part of our infection prevention activities. And overall, we need to have a committee who will coordinate these activities to ensure things happen in the right direction. The preparedness. Now there are 2 areas. One is we have all patients who are suspects are the COVID positives have to be placed in the isolation ward separately, and also for critically ill, we need to have we need to prepare the ICU. Now, when we set up these places, like as I said earlier, we need to make sure these areas are away, or it is zoned out separately from non-COVID patients who are placed in the same hospital, if partly the hospital is being used. And these designated area should be away from the obstetrics and the neonatal area and the pediatric children, because of the vulnerability that, and also the geriatric. So we need to make sure that these facilities are not placed anywhere near the areas that are treating the geriatric or the obstetric or the child health care. Now, human resource planning, that is something we need to have a plan for now and for future, assuming that we may have more patients. And the most important, that we also need to make our plans
We need to assess and see how much PPE we have, how much drugs that we have, especially the clinic solutions, the drugs that are used for these COVID positive patients. Now, do we have adequate supply? So the assessment of that will help us to plan further. Now, to say a little bit more about where are we going to place these patients who are diagnosed to be positive or who are suspected. Now, these patients, ideally, they have to be, especially the suspected patients, have to be in the single rooms, individual rooms. Of course, even confirmed patients, ideally, it is in a single room with a negative pressure or HEPA filter, but always that is not possible. So the other solution is, if these patients are placed in a bigger area, the bed space has to be at least 1 meter in between, or some kind of a barricade has to be there, or in a bigger ward, like if your capacity is 40 bedded, you admit only 20 beds with a space of 1 meter and above, that we will be able to provide. And these, if we use those wards, it has to be well ventilated, for it natural ventilation has to be there so that the natural airflow is there. Now, we must have a separate entry or exit. Now, suppose if for a lift, now I can say you have designated a certain part of your patient care area. Now that area has, maybe you have 3 or 4 lifts which can be used by these patients. Now what you will have to do is, you may have to allocate separately 1 lift for these patients, or you block, because the hospitals will have multiple entries. So wherever you have, if you have multiple entry access to this particular area where these patients and the suspects are cared for, we need to close all those entry and make sure there is only 1 entry. Now that is also guarded by a security to make sure that people who need to go alone must have enter into this space. So therefore, we need to, people are also don't enter unnecessarily. Now, we need to place signs if we don't have policies like no visitors to these areas. Now, we need to post our signages to say that there are no visitors, or if you don't want anyone to enter, we need to say, please do not enter. So these kind of things have to be done. And as I said, patients who are, these patients with the care for those individual rooms should have a negative pressure, which is desirable. But or if you have a air condition, ensure 12 air changes per hour, and we filter all the exhaust air. And if the room is part of the central air condition, that is not acceptable. We cannot allow a central air condition to be in this area. Now, individual wards, we must make sure that there is a separate place for changing, and we need to, usually it's ideal that outside, just outside the ward, you identify a place for donning. Now, sometimes all that what we talk may not be possible. Then as you enter, the first room has to be your changing room. I think many of the places, the hospitals do have changing places for nurses. In that situations, you identify nearer, there is a donning area, or to put on their PPE. And only then that they will enter into their patient care area. Now, if you have individual rooms where you are nursing patients, make sure that you place even the bins in the individual rooms, including sharp containers. And that you remove all that is not vital for these patients. Now, we may have unnecessary furnitures. Now, that can be taken. And these patients keep their table within their reach, because we don't want unnecessarily people coming in contact with the patient. So whatever way that we can help by placing it, especially patients who are not sick, Then individual rooms must have a toilet facilities, and then make sure that hand washing facilities are available. When I talk about hand washing facilities, it's not only within inside the ward, even before entering the ward, before entering the hospitals in the common area, wherever possible, we must provide hand washing facility. Now today it is possible for us to bring one for a time being and leave it and take it back. So that kind of a temporary facilities must be provided in several parts of the hospital. And then in these isolation room, we must have it in front as well as inside each room for adequate hand washing facilities for nurses, for patients, for them to use, as well as we also must use hand rub outside the room or inside. So wherever possible, we must provide so that the healthcare personnel they are able to practice adequate hand washing. As much as possible, try not to share the equipment. For example, if you talk about thermometer, BP apparatus, now it is possible for us to provide for individual patient, but if it is not, we should be able to use it, we should be able to disinfect using ethanol, or it is the spirit that we should be able to disinfect in between patient. And these patients who are admitted in this ward should not be moved outside to other areas unnecessarily. So it is appropriate if it is possible to have a portable X-ray that is available within the area, and also an ultrasound equipment that is available. Now, set up a telephone or communication media, because both COVID and suspect patients, it's a hospital policy. I can say we do not allow any relatives to be with the patients in our hospital. So we also have to understand how do patients communicate. So now individual wards are given one phone connection, like mobile phone. We do not want individuals using their own mobile. Now, if patients' relatives wants to talk to the healthcare professionals, or they just want to see the patient, now they should be able to call this number. And of course, patients do have their own telephone and they communicate with the relative. But however, whichever way that we should be able to facilitate their communication. Now, we also have to see that our ICUs are ready. Now, again, when you talk about ICUs, it depends on, are we going to allot a separate ICU? Now, this again depends on the facility that you have. Probably a facility where there are more ICUs are available. Like for us, like one ICU is for positives, one for suspects, and one ICU for non-COVID patients. And all that is for the medical. Then all the surgical patients go to another ICU. Now with this workload, routine workload that's not happening in the hospitals, there are most of the beds have been shut down. So it's easy to mobilize manpower and these facilities to another area. But of course, individual areas will have to see how you are going to designate. But I think as one underlying policy is, please, we need to make sure that the positive patients are separate and the suspects are not put along with the positive patients, and as much as possible they are in the individual areas until the test comes. I mean, probably just saying how we do it, like we have the individual rooms in one wards, like in fact there are 3 wards currently, one is being used, so all suspect cases get in. Now these results come within within 7-8 hours. The results are from the time the sample taken and the results are available, then the patients are negative, patients are shifted out. If somebody is positive, they go into the COVID area. But so I think we'll have to develop a system how we want to do it. But what do we do in an ICU where you do not have too many ICUs in a setup? Now we may have to designate, are we going to designate the ICU for a COVID patients who are critically ill and non-COVID patients in another area? So we need to plan for ourselves to see how are we going to receive these patients. Now, do we have negative pressure or HEPA filter available? Or then what about the mask? Now these patients who are dealing with COVID positive or the suspected patients, now we expect them to have utilized the full PPE. Now I'm not going to discuss in detail about PPE. You already have a session and the video, everything is available. So we need to make sure now all that what was discussed in that session, now that's applicable when you care for these patients. We need to make sure that it is available, and we need to assign a donning and a doffing area. In fact, we must try and arrange even a place for a shower in each of the areas. So after doffing, we encourage our staff to have a shower before they leave the hospital, because therefore they are protecting themselves and their loved ones. Now, as you prepare for ICU, we also have to make sure that equipment like monitors, or pumps, or ventilators, are they available? Now, when we talk about these numbers, it's not only for today's cases that we have. We do not know what the future is. We need to keep preparing ourselves so that we don't face a situations that we don't have any of this critical equipment. Coming to personal protective equipment, as I said, what is specified, what you had learned in the previous sessions, that is what I put it in one word as PPE. Make sure that everything is available in the areas where you're caring for these patients. And then apart from that, and also hand washing facilities. But what about the non-COVID area? So we need to have a policy. What do we say? Now, every patient, every health personnel who come into contact with the patient, that we provide surgical masks. Now, people who are not in contact with the direct patient care, they use the cloth mask. So, this is the kind of a policy that we use. So, we need to plan how are we going to handle these in terms of personal protective equipment. Now, one inappropriate use of PPE. For example, in a non-COVID area, using a N95 is not needed, but you find that people are anxious. So we also have to understand their mentality, and we need to have ways by which that they are also trained to know what is going on and they accept what is happening there. So in terms of PPE, it is not just supplying, but making sure that it is appropriately used, it's diligently used, so that we will be able to use it, in the right way, and we will have supplies as long as we need it. Now, we need to coordinate our supply chains. In order to do that, you should have a supply chain to ensure adequate and appropriate distribution is done. Now, maybe I would, here you need to say there is a ordering, there is a system. Now, you also have to see, maybe I would share what happens in our institution. We have a separate committee which is called Personal Protective Equipment Committee. Now, we have taken into consideration of the number of people who are working in each area, whether it's a COVID or non-COVID. Now, clear-cut policy is laid down who uses what PPE, and all have been informed about it. And there is a number, for example, a non-COVID area, depending on the number of nurses or health personnel there, maybe it is 200 per week or 300 per week. So there is a number fixed up, and that number is provided. The nurses are given the authority to order on a week. But if there is a sudden need, that they can always contact. The mechanism is the nurses will contact the nursing superintendent's office, and we have one deputy who is part of the PPE committee, who makes in the part of the committee that makes the decision. So she takes it there and gets it approved, and of course, and then the individual areas request is increased. So this is the way we have the facility, and also our nurses have to, all these PPEs are with them, so they also kind of give out as and when it is required in a right way. So they have been educated, they have been trained who has to use and when to use and how to use it. Now, scrubs can be organized so that these scrubs, the nurses who work in these COVID areas, they come, they change into scrub, and then they wear the personal protective equipment, and then they go work with the patient. I mean, after the donning, they go work with the patients, and then they come back and they do the doffing. They have the shower facilities. So I think this is something we need to designate. We don't have the ready shower which is available. What we have done is we have identified bathrooms and other toilet areas where you can fix an additional shower for people to utilize these facilities. So this is what something we need to look at it. Now, I've just listed down the various PPE that are needed. Now, I'm not going to go into detail. You've had a session on it. And again, what I would like to say, as we talk about the shortage of PPE, I think optimal, appropriate usage, that is something we need to be careful about it. Coming to the next point. So all this is towards preparing, are we having enough facility in our health facility? Are we well prepared to take care of these patients in terms of isolation or ICU? We have discussed. The next aspect is to establishing protocols or screening, whatever. Now, every patient who enters the hospital, there must be a mechanism that they are screened for. Whether they come into emergency or they, I mean, of course, today no regular outpatient department or anyone who enters. So at the entry, irrespective of the number of entry points that you have in the hospital, you can have people employed over there to check very simple history about the cough or the fever or the, checking temperature. So there's a quick screening that goes on. And anybody who has these symptoms or signs, they are sent to they should be sent to the fever clinic, because this is, again, it is mandatory. Every hospital that are treating patients with COVID or suspects, that we must have. Now, all three centers that I talked about in the beginning, now all three must have an area to say there is a fever clinic for a quick assessment. Then everywhere we have to make sure that we avoid overcrowding. So in the hospital. The third point is to ensure that the availability of basic emergency care is available, whether it is a community care center or it is as a hospital or a smaller center. We need to make sure when a patient comes that they are not just sent saying you are referred to another area. Though you can refer them from the centers, but before that we should have the facility that provide the basic emergency care if needed. Now, supply and procurement plan, which I think most of it we have talked about it. So how do we, as we said, for the PPE, so as nurse leaders, we'll have to make sure what is the total availability. We should be aware what is the number available. I mean, it is not only the nursing responsibility. Now, it's a responsibility of the leaders in the hospital to see that what is the number that is available. So how much that we are using in a day. So in that case, what would be our requirement for a month or two? So make plan accordingly and do indent accordingly. So same with oxygen support as well as ventilator. We must have a contingency plan if we have shortage. What do we do? Now, the next point is how do we manage our visitors? Because when there is a crisis, managing people becomes very difficult. So it's important that we have policies about visitor restriction. So what is your policy with regard to confirmed or suspected cases? As I said, we have a policy. We don't allow relatives for suspected or confirmed. Once the suspected, if it becomes negative, then they are allowed to come in. Now, rest of the hospitals, what is your policy? Now, what we have done is we have allowed only one relative per patient. Now, these patients, again, Now we can also, if there are more number, we can cut down. We don't have to have the visiting time, elaborate visiting time. So cutting down on that. Now we have to make a policy. What do we do when if a mother, if a pediatric child comes or if a geriatric patient comes? Can we say without relative? For a pediatric mother, for a pediatric child, or what we do is we allow the mother to come, but with the full PPE. The mother is provided full PPE. We tell them you identify only, it's usually the mother who comes in, one person. Now, if they, at any time, then if they have to go out or come and then somebody comes, it's a separate PPE that has to be provided. So this is the instruction that's given to the mothers, and then they are provided PPE. So we need to make a policy. What are we going to do? So individual areas will have to look at that. The next is the testing and lab capacity. I mean, it may not be very directly to the nursing, the first part to see what is the capacity, but at the smaller areas, and at least we need to know what is, first of all, our procedure. However, we must be familiar in a hospital, who is the point of contact. In case if you want to send sample or you want to clarify something, there must be a person with whom that you can contact. So point of contact, and there must be a clear-cut protocol. How do we collect? How do we transport the sample? Now, it's recommended now these swabbing, this is done in one area so that we protect PPEs. So these are some of the policies, and then the transportation again, how are we going to, normally it is a double sealed and labeled, and the adequate precautions are taken. So this has to be done. Now coming to communicating result, now today it is like, it's not something that everybody is keen to know what's going on, but we know that there is a government protocol. When there is a patient who is positive, now government authorities to be informed first. So I think we must find out what is that channel of communication, and then we should follow accordingly. And as we plan for the hospital, even for the lab facility, we need to take, in case if the sample number increases, are we going to increase the number of shifts that the lab works, or are you going to identify one more lab to do the test? So these kind of decisions have to be done. Again, shifting the patients, we have already talked about. So one thing here I want to say, the ambulance that are dedicated for transporting these patients, which has to be dedicated one, because there are certain protocol. Again, the people who are involved in transport should be familiar. That means if a health professional, I mean like people who are accompanying will go with the full PPE, and the all suspects or the confirmed cases, they have to be, you have to give them the mask before you transfer. And if the ambulance is used,
Sorry. So the staff in the ambulance, I hope I'm heard. The staff in the ambulance to be trained, and people who are involved in transfer, they also should use appropriate PPE. And if you are using an ambulance to transfer any of these patients, the ambulance must be cleaned. We say the Dakins 1% is used to clean these areas, so that has to be used and cleaned before you use the ambulance for another patient. Now the next aspect is the environment control. Now it's throughout the hospital. Now we need to increase the frequency of cleaning, and we need to make sure that the equipment are disinfected, especially the patients, I mean in the COVID or the suspect areas, as I discussed earlier. So what do we do with linen? Now linen, what we practice, the linen that are used, which are soaked in Dakins 1%, and after half an hour, then it is sent to laundry. Because we also face the situation where our workers were very anxious. So we had to give them the assurance. Then about the articles, so all these we need to plan, and we need to have a clear-cut guideline. now which has to be communicated to others. Now the next slide, I'm going to say what are the cleaning solutions that have been recommended. Now you will find that 1% Dakins, now that is the main one that we use, and the common areas that bleaching can be used to use the bathrooms and toilets, the bleach can be used, and then of course all the articles, the ethanol can be used to clean. Then of course the scopies, which unless it's emergency it doesn't happen. If it happens, it's a usual with enzyme cleaning that has to go on. Now the last preparedness, though it's the last part that I have added, COVID-19 Preparedness Response Committee. Now this is something the institution can utilize the existing committee or they can create one. Now I want to say how we coordinate in our own institution. We have different committees, that is, as I said, the PPE committee, environment cleaning, training committee, and of course HSCC is there. Now each committee has their clear-cut area what they are working, and over and above we have a core committee which involves the director, medical superintendent, nursing superintendent, and the infection ID professor and general superintendent who is part of it. So every morning that we meet, and each of our area, what are the issues, what plan, what suggestions, we come and discuss. So after that, now anything that the decisions that are taken, which is also communicated to other individual committees who are looking at the individual aspects. Now, of course, any policy decisions, so normally in our institution, we meet every once a week, the administrative committee, where nursing superintendent and dean are part of the committee. Now, during this time, either twice or thrice, the administrative committee also meets to discuss. So this is a kind of preparedness what we have, but individual areas can plan. But what is important here is it has to be a joint work. It cannot be any one person. I think everyone should be able to bring their issues, their problems, so that we find a solution. And at all time, we always talk about what do we do next. Like, it's not for managing only today what the number of patients have come. If the number increases, what do we do? So plan A, plan B, we should have it, and we go accordingly. And we need to make sure that this is communicated to our colleagues, our supervisors, so they are aware of it. Actually, what we do is we have a WhatsApp group, so we put up any of these communications and communicate to our in-charge nurses, to our supervisors at all levels, and to our heads of departments. Now, that is about the facility preparedness. Now, the second part that I'm going to talk to you about human resource management. Now, human resource management is a very critical aspect, and without people, we can't do anything. Now, it's not that they are needed only in the clinical area. They are also needed in different areas. When we talk about at the country level, at the different centers that we have, all three types of centers that we talked about. So we need people for surveillance, we need people for clinical management, the quarantine area, managing those area, isolation facilities, logistics, supply, and of course we should not forget the psychosocial care to our patients. I'm glad that we have one more sessions, because one of the, somehow recently, like sometime you hear news how people have committed suicide when they are suspected. So you can understand the trauma that they go through. So in all this, the people have to be, we need the manpower. So surveillance activities happens at a grassroots level. We are all well aware of it, and we need manpower to supervise this. There are a lot of containment operations goes on. As our cases increases, we see there are different zones, and the containment operations that happens at the grassroots level, and the laboratory testing that happens, and the samples are collected and sent, not just from the hospital, from the community, lots of them that goes. So there has to be a coordinated effort. So everywhere human manpower is needed. And then clinical management, we have already talked about it. We talked about how do we I mean, of course, we have our own, we need to develop our own operating SOPs for everything. We need to, that is to manage the suspect or confirmed patients. And of course, the suspects that we call it as the severe acute respiratory infection cases, or we call it as a SARI ward or SARI cases. So when you talk about clinical management, all this we have already talked about it: transportation, disinfection, waste management, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about staffing plan. Next slide. So we need to identify people who can work in the frontline staff. So now frontline, actually there are who are the nursing officers, staff nurses who are going to be working in the front line, who are the supervisors, so identify people. And we need to have supervisors for each shift. Now, why is it important that we identify people that are designated? We know that these people have to be trained. Now, we also may have to move people from other areas. So we should be able to do that. So we need to have a detailed staff rotation plan. And we also say, what do we do in case if you need more people, if you open up more areas? So all these plans that we need to have. Now, as we identify people, and the training activity must go on. Now, it's possible that you identify, because our focus should not be only on training people working in the COVID areas. Programs, train all your leaders, and then competencies in terms use of PPE. It's not just taking a session. We must make sure whether they are competent before we really on our schedule. Now, if it is themselves, and then they can have a cup of coffee, whatever, and then they can, once they're done, and when before break time, they have to do doffing, and you may have to change your PPE. So keep that in mind, and you decide what is the best way that you can utilize your PPE, utilize your manpower. And of course, there are people also have to be, especially when they are working in the COVID areas, they need to have a break. And our institution actually has given 2 weeks of additional leave to all our healthcare workers. So we are able to make use of those leaves in addition to, apart from this, so that they have a break. Now, it is also recommended that the nursing students, all of us are aware, we all got the communication that is why the students, though they don't have classes, they're all there helping us. And and these students, first we must always take the PGs or the UG interns, especially if you are going to use them in the COVID area. So train them. I think that is a key word that we need to remember. No single individual should enter into the COVID area without being trained. We should have that responsibility of training and then posting them. Now, human resources also needed in the quarantine areas. Now, other, and of course, as I already talked about the psychosocial care. So we need to identify people who will be able to, is it the social workers or is our counselors? Now, who should be actually the counselors not only working, working for the, not only thinking about the patients, we must remember that even our staff goes through different emotional, feelings. So there must be a counseling facility available for them in case if you identify someone who was very anxious, we should be able to take care of them. Now, I think capacity building, already I've talked about it. So why do we do that? One is you need to strengthen their clinical skill. Now, you also have to strengthen their infection prevention and control measures. Now, these sessions of infection prevention that happens in all the times, but we need to review it repeatedly so that everybody becomes very thorough about it. And when you talk about, and we also make sure that all our nurses are familiar about COVID-19, what are the signs and symptoms, how to identify, and what are the precautions to take. I think this has to be trained to everybody. This has to be taught to everybody. Now, of course, identify group who are going to be working in ventilator. Make sure that they are familiar with ventilator care and critical care. Now, institution like ours, we have a different ICUs, so we are mobilizing people from other ICUs. But if we do not have enough people who are competent with ventilator care, we need to make sure that our staff, senior staff, are trained in ventilator care and a critical care, and they are kept ready. So, of course, donning and doffing, which I have already talked about it. Then waste disposal. Now, this is mainly people working in the community level or in the smaller centers. They should be familiar how do the, in terms of surveillance, contact tracing, data management, reporting. I think people should be keeping themselves update with the Ministry of Health updates that come up, because we see that the changes happens. So it's not just like one time information, like today what I say, probably maybe something different next week depending on the situation. So we need to ensure that our people keep themselves updated with what is going on. Now, of course, about transportation, we need to educate them how to safely transfer, how to protect themselves. Next. Now, this is the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has said that each state will designate a nodal officer for training, for coordination, and they will train the master trainers and create a database. Now, of course, in the individual hospital levels, I'm sure everybody has started their own training at a different level. Now, as we talk about our various preparedness, I think we also need to know the safety of our healthcare worker. Now, with the various reports that we see that it also can be a threat to the healthcare worker. Everybody is worried about it. So it's a responsibility for us to see that they are protected. So one is pathogen exposure. Another aspect where probably we are not looking at it, it's a psychological distress. So that is what earlier, as I said, ideally a counselor available, meeting those who need or meeting them periodically would help them to overcome fatigue, burnout, and the stigma. I've heard my girls saying when we walk, the people are saying, you know, COVID-19 people are coming. So this is a kind of stigma that happens around them. So we need to be cautious of this fact, and we need to take care of that. So every employee has the right the key component. So prevention is through training. So we need to do that. Then of course, I think a lot of these, what I have already mentioned, provide adequate PPE, provide adequate infection prevention control measures, and provide them appropriate security, a blame-free environment. If somebody is feeling very upset, or if in fact the worker has the right, if they don't want to work in an area, we should respect that. We may have to remove people temporarily, help them, and give them the time to develop themselves. Then Health workers must be familiar to assess so that any symptoms that they report immediately, and if they are sick, what to do, and make sure that appropriate working hours. That's what I said. If you have a long working hours, do they have enough breaks? So what do you do in terms of PPE? Do you ask them to, like they have to do doffing? So these are some of the things we need to keep that in mind. So preferably actually the 12 hours, especially in an ICU at this time, is it appropriate? I don't know. Actually, there were some requests in our own area, our own staff, but we have not started because we are able to manage with the manpower. I mean, because I think the other services have cut down, we are able to do it. So we have not increased the working hours at all. Now, are health workers to exercise their right? As I said, if somebody strongly feels they don't want to work, we should be able to accept it. We should be able to prepare, but I'm sure with proper counseling that they understand. I mean, I must say that we have not had such situations. And I think we have to provide enough support to our staff. We need to encourage them. We need to appreciate them so that they feel that their service is recognized. Now, each health worker also has a responsibility. Now, there are several training program goes on. Now, they must take part. It is not that, you maintain attendance to see who has done, who hasn't done. But I think it's the individual staff should take up saying, I have not had the trainings. So they should be able to. So it is their responsibility that they must take part in the training and they must follow safety procedures. And like, as we said, the showers are provided. So initially we found that girls were reluctant to take a shower. So then we found out what is the reason. So, I mean, develop them and talk to them. See, sometimes they don't understand the danger of it. So these kind of precautions will help. It will avoid exposing others, not only them, their own family. Then of course, ensure that the protocol and procedures are available for our staff. It can be put up in individual common areas or it can be uploaded where they can refer so that they can, a quick reference is available, and they must use these protocols and procedures. And there must be a channel of communication and clarification. So individual staff should feel that if they have a doubt that they should be able to clarify with regard to this. Then of course, all patients, whether they are a positive or a suspect, anyone, first of all, we have to treat our patients with respect, compassion, and dignity. Maintain patient confidentiality. That's very important. But I think with COVID positives, I think that is sometime because of the various reporting and it is available in the public domain. So we are not really able to maintain confidentiality. I mean, when I say, to say that this patient is, like if you compare it with HIV, we don't tell who is positive, who is negative. But that for the interest of the larger community, we have to say now who are all the positive. But however, we should not be giving unwanted information. What is needed for the government officials, but not for your fellow co-workers or for somebody who is wanting to know more about it. Now, public reporting procedure, as we said, because for the COVID-19, there is a specific public reporting procedure which has to be strictly followed. Of course, each health worker must practice donning and doffing correctly. Watching video is different from practicing. So I would say that it is the individual responsibility to make sure that they practice and get it approved, that they are doing the right thing so that they can protect themselves. And as I said, take care of their health, and if needed, they should self-isolate. And of course, mental health. So we can ask ourselves, are we prepared? Is our healthcare facility ready to care for patients or to manage patients with COVID-19 infection? or with COVID-19 suspected cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pramila. The session was not only informative, but a lot of learning we had, how to have in the hospital, the isolation wards, and how to take care of ourselves and also to the patient and the confidentiality. So thank you very much, Dr. Pramila. Now we have around some questions, and I will take only the questions which are applicable to this session, because there are many questions which are not applicable. So I would like to answer only, give you the questions only which are applicable to your session. I think some questions are for the government, so we are not going to answer that. What is the difference between isolation and quarantine?
Okay. Now, quarantine, you need not, you need not be a suspect. Like we know that people who had a travel history, or if you had any of your family member who have had a travel history, or if you have had a history of coming in contact with people who are COVID positive. Like now, each time when you listen to news, you see now a COVID positive patient is identified. Anybody living, around that area, they've been quarantined. So quarantine, not necessarily you are a, you have got the infection or you are a suspect. But when you say isolation, now when you are in quarantine, maybe you acquire any of these symptoms. Now today, if you have dry cough or fever above 38 degree, and then if you say that somebody near my house is positive with, and I have these symptoms, you come to the hospital, you come under the suspect category. Then the test is done, and then they will say if you are negative, whether you go home or if you have any issues, that will be treated, or if you are need admission, that you are admitted in the non-COVID area. Now, if you are positive, then you are sent to the COVID positive area. This is how the flow is.
Ma'am, you said about planning. So I want, this is a question from one of the participants, that you said about planning, but if there's an increased case of COVID patients and we don't have ventilators, then how do we go about?
I think probably, I know, see, I come from an institution which is large. I must say that we have just set up a 12-bedded ICU, bought so many ventilators, all that. But one thing we need to know, you don't wait till you say that you don't have ventilator. Now today, how many COVID positive patients are there needing critically care? Now, how many more such patients that can my hospital can accommodate? So keep assessing. See, this is what I said. We meet every morning. So we, in fact, like from our night supervisors, I take the account to say what is the number of patients, where they are. So we present it, and then if there are any difficulties with PPE and so on. And then what we do is, if we need, whether it's not only in terms of ventilator, in terms of beds, so you make your plans, which is the other area you want to open up. But coming back to your question about ventilator, so keep a close track. What is the number you're utilizing, what is available? Because it's not possible for every institution to go by ventilator now. So you need to see, suppose if you reach a number that beyond that you will not be able to, if you are a COVID designated COVID hospital, I'm sure you will have to communicate to the authorities that this is what your position.
Ma'am, in many areas where nursing staff can't have it or they're working with lack of resource, so what about their health security?
I think I can say that patients who are coming in contact with COVID or suspect have to have PPE. It's for their safety. But what do we do? I think today I can say the cost has gone up dramatically for the equipment. And what I mean, like for us, we are also in communication with the government. So what I understand, I mean, if I'm right, that they are also willing to help us to identify sources where we can buy things like PPE.
Thank you, ma'am. What about window in the room of a patient?
Okay, now that's what I said. Ideal, if you talk about a healthcare, protecting a healthcare and negative pressure for a COVID positive patient. But if you have, like we have an isolation ward with 23 beds, so currently we keep our patients in the isolation room. So what we keep talking, suppose if the number becomes more, what do we do? So we identified a ward which has got a good cross ventilation. The patients in that area. So windows have to be open. I think you want to know whether the windows to be closed.
Yes. Yes.
Ventilation. So if you close, you will not have ventilation.
Okay, ma'am. Why do we need negative pressure room for COVID-19?
I said it's ideal, but ideal, if you can't practice, then you go, boy, that's what we said. You place patients, COVID positive patients, but with what is recommended is 1 meter. What we have identified, what we have done is like a ward which can hold 40 patients, maximum of 18 or 19 patients, because you also have to designate areas for donning, doffing, and the various things. So we need to modify.
What is respiratory etiquette?
That is coughing technique.
In which okay, ma'am. In each COVID patient looked after, whether each COVID patient is looked after by a separate individual nurse?
See this again now, patients, if they are not sick, you don't have to have individual, you can continue with your ratio. If it is a patient, especially if they are mild or very mild suspected, your 1:6 will cover that. But when it comes to critical care, if they are on ventilator, you will need 1:1. If they are on non-ventilator, then it is the 1:2. It's the same ratio.
Okay.
So when you're caring for a COVID positive patients, you are protecting yourself. Of course, if you are using, I mean, you can use disposable aprons. I mean, I can understand your question. Moving from one patient to other patient. On top of your PPE, you can also use your disposable aprons in between patients if you want.
Dr. Preeta, if you can answer this question, it has become airborne disease. Is it true? What are the symptomatic treatment given in hospital? What is the role of hydrochloroquine in treatment?
The disease being new knowledge is coming every day. When we started, it was said it is only droplet and it is not an airborne disease. And recent knowledge in recent literature is talking about the latest reports that are coming, study reports that are being published is saying that these air particles can remain in the air. And if they remain in the air and get suspended, they can stay longer and it can actually be transported until 8 meters. This is the latest. Recently, a few research reports which I read, it is saying. So being the new disease, we said it is only 1 meter, 3 to 6 feet. Now it is, when there is a aerosol or when there is a coughing or a sneezing kind of a thing can cause the air particles on the suspended in the air. So therefore, it has to be considered as an airborne on that particular situation. So it is not only droplet, now it's said it is also airborne.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Dr. Pramila, if the question is for you, what does it mean by HEPA filter?
HEPA filter, it is again, it's again for, filtering the air that go.
Indoor air.
It's called high efficiency particulate air. So it will, I mean, normally you would have seen in the transplant rooms and operation theaters that you have HEPA filters, so that this has the high filtering capacity. So the air that goes out.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. There are a lot of questions on donning and doffing. I think let the participants look into the third video, which is placed on the website. It is very detailed one. If you have any questions, please place it on webinar q99@gmail.com, so that we can look into those questions. Because we don't want to repeat again and again all those questions. I think how the plasma therapy works for this COVID. Dr. Punita, I think we have told last session also. Would you like to say something on?
Yeah, I mean, they are just doing some clinical trials on that. And we read recently in a newspaper saying this plasma therapy, the Kerala, they wanted to start. So they got permission from ICMR and they are doing the clinical trials and they have already started using this plasma therapy. How does it work? They believe is that the plasma transfusion, plasma from the recovered patient, that plasma transfused to the a very severely ill patient, this is with COVID, will help because the plasma will contain the antibodies that are produced against the virus. And it is hoped these antibodies that are produced against the virus will work and decrease the severity of the COVID illness in the critically ill patient. This is a understanding, and this is what is scientifically explained, but more trials are being done, and hopefully we will get more support, scientific support, and it will become a new knowledge in relation to that. So this is still under trial.
In continuation of that, can I come in, Bharti?
Yes, sir.
In continuation of that, what Dr. Punita mentioned, yesterday, Ministry of Health has approved a proposal which came from the government of Uttar Pradesh for this plasma, this thing. It is officially ICMR yesterday has approved their proposal. It is that is Uttar Pradesh. So therefore, this is a some sort of on a pilot they are doing it. But if they find some success, then it is going to be used for the treatment protocol. Besides that, I think another question which I was listening that for the chloroquine, the type of where recently the USA has imported the drug from India. This is, I think you must have seen the ICMR has already approved this drug for the healthcare providers. This drug has been already approved for the healthcare provider, but there are a lot of discussions which are going on, and still the physicians are advising this should be taken only with the prescription, because there is a lot of complications which are there for this drug, but they are advising that this drug should not be taken as a routine. This drug has to be given by the prescription by the doctor. Next question.
Dr. Pramila, this question is for you. Which areas are non-COVID areas?
Okay, that is, see, the hospitals are currently running emergency services. So now not all patients who come into hospitals are with COVID suspects or positive. So you have an area COVID positive or suspect. Now you have your maternity block, you have your pediatric block, or you have emergency surgical post-op. So that is called non-COVID areas.
Ma'am, is there any protocol about rotation of staff?
Yes, I mean, like we have to, because I think for any isolation area people working, it is not right the same people are being exposed, because the duration of exposure also matters. So therefore, we have to plan rotation. That means different team comes in.
Ma'am, there are one more question is, okay, thank you. One more question is, patients who are corona positive sometimes does not have the symptoms. So how to assess them?
That is what today, I think the
Asymptomatic.
because we say that 70 to 80% people can have very mild or mild, which you probably may ignore. So you can have asymptomatic.
Okay, ma'am. One more question is okay.
Sorry, I think that only answer to it, like as now the government, you can see that every day the testing is becoming more and more. So I'm sure we'll reach a point that every patient who comes into hospital may, this becomes a mandatory. So when that comes, you will know asymptomatic patients. Testing is the only possible solution.
There's a question. Why didn't you add nurse practitioners to it? Finalist.
Definitely, I think when I talk about the core team, that's I meant nurse leaders. So nurse leaders includes everybody. So practitioners. So especially critical care area, I'm sure nurse practitioners can take a lead role over there in caring for. I did talk about nurses' role. So there you can take the lead role in the critical care area.
There is a question is what is surge facility and how do we plan it?
Okay, surge facility is additional facility. Now, surge facility can be in terms of beds or in terms of your equipment or in terms of your manpower. Now, in terms of bed, as I explained to you, now currently how many people you have. If your number increases, what is your next plan? If it increases, so same way your equipment, what's the number needed? How much? So we assume today we are seeing the trend that the cases are increasing day by day. So keeping that in mind, we should be expecting more patients at all times. So what is the facility instead of waiting for patients to arrive and then start making plans? So that is what saying planning ahead, surge facility.
There's a question. How do we provide the emergency facility to the community area?
Okay, see this COVID community care centers, they identified areas, all are given the basic. And there the nursing, people who are posted there, I think our basic BLS. We should at least, at least that part, starting oxygen. I'm going to extreme BLS, but so what is possible? A patient become breathless, you should be able to start, give oxygen. Or immediately transfer the patient with the oxygen facility. If patient deteriorate, that's what. The next part is BLS. So within what is available with us.
Thank you, ma'am. I don't know why the people have these type of mindset. Mr. Rahul Sharma, there's a question, can nurse practitioners not participate in this webinar? This webinar is open to all. So there's nurse practitioners, the final year students of GNM or the nurse faculty, anybody who is a nurse can participate in this webinar or would be future nurses also. That's why we have allowed even the undergraduate students to participate in this webinar. So it is the interest of a participant to participate in this webinar, as everything is, we do inform on our website. So be regularly watching our websites to participate in this webinar. Now, we are discussing about isolation and infection prevention, Dr. Pramila. So what about healthcare worker not able to do the basic activities of daily living when they enter a COVID isolation area? How can we tackle this?
See, when one of the principle when you are caring for these patients, minimal contact, even for healthcare workers, though you're protected. That is why we say plan your activities together and enter, do it. And that is mainly to avoid prolonged exposure. So it's to protect the healthcare worker.
Some people are asking the PPTs. I just want to tell you that the videos are available of the last webinar series on our website, and today's video will also be there on tomorrow afternoon. So we can't send the PPT to each individual. So we ask you to download our videos from our website, and you can teach your staff from that.
I think, sorry, one of the question is something about nutrition.
Yes,
I think
good nutrition needs policy settings to be followed. If one of the suspect is positive, what about other suspects are negative?
Okay. So both first about the nutrition. See, when we say that there is no relative, we make arrangement that the hospital provide diet for the patient. And when it comes for infant, we developed a system even for our own nurses. If they can get their food from the hospital, even that facility has been taken care. Now, coming to how do you provide, with the suspect cases, that is what in the beginning I insisted the single isolation rooms are more mandatory for the suspects, because of course COVID patients, placing them in the single room with a negative pressure, it is more to protect the healthcare worker. But if your number has become more, you are not able to put them in individual rooms. We have to be prepared that definitely with adequate PPE, that the nurses look after these patients in a ward, that they are placed apart. But when it comes for suspect, preferably, that is what it's important that they are in single room. That is why I said it's important that we do not have isolation room, but what we have done is even our own about 100 sample, you may have 3 positive. So it's important that you protect this 97 from the 3 who are positive. So that is why the isolation is important for the suspects.
There's a question about the people, not about the nurses. People are not aware about disposing the mask. So what can we do for the disposal?
I think training, education, that is nurses, public, I think the government, you can see in all the channels that they are educating. So in the hospital, display a lot of notices so that people learn. And I think we need to see the different ways that we educate our public, our staff and everyone. And also provide bins, so that, and with a sign postage so that they know that where to throw it.
No, but I
Yes.
think Dr. Pramila, can you at least elaborate what are the, in case that if somebody can get it, how to dispose of at home and all, what type of a protocol? I think some standard protocol, if it is there, better to tell our
Okay.
participants.
I think it's I can talk from the hospital perspective, all this are incinerated. So in a home setter, I think it's probably it's ideal, dig a ground, put it, and then deep burial probably may be ideal. I think, I don't know if Dr. Vatsala is around, community person, I can.
Dr. Punita, can you, because nowadays people are, we are getting a lot of the information through media that at home better to use any homemade handkerchief or the cotton cloth, and that can be disinfected at home and you can wash and reuse it. That type of the information which is being fed to the public through media.
Even CDC guidelines talk about reuse of fabric made cloth made mask. That is disinfect. They talk about you disinfect it in the detergent washing machine, not handling, but disinfect any kind of a cloth or whatever is used. Along with that, this also can be disinfected if the cloth is being made. That's one I remember reading that. And also there are many places how they say that how the cloth mask can be made temporarily and it can be used, washed and reused. And use of detergent and sunlight has been recommended.
There's one question on, I think, thank you. I think they can also look into the PPs. I think there in that session, we have talked about how to dispose of the mask. People can look into the third video. And we are looking now, we have one more question is, are there any forums set where the nurses can also help in counseling? I think we have in Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, there is a website, there is a number which people can see. I mean, I don't remember that. If you can look into Ministry of Health and Family Welfare website, there is a number where you can get the mental counseling, so that people could be strengthened mentally for this COVID-19. I think, Dr. Punita, am I right? It is there on the Ministry of Health and Welfare.
Yeah, that I think there is a new 24/7 line, line that they have given. That is the mental health counseling that's done by the IMA has developed. I think that's the reason they're saying IMA has developed lifeline for mental health counseling. Is there any nursing group has developed any kind of those counseling? Probably the Psychiatric Nurses Association is one another, National Association is one another, group who could try and develop such kind of a line online helping. I don't know, sir also will be able to tell me that.
I think we are going to put up in the what Dr. Punita just now mentioned with regard to 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. The Indian Medical Association has identified the panel of clinical psychologists for a counseling, which those telephone numbers will be putting in our INC website. That is one. The NIMANS, the Bangalore, they are also having a panel of this thing. And also the at least in Karnataka, the TNA has come out with some panel of people for the counseling, and the ISPN is also preparing the panel, and I think within 2 or 3 days they are going to put the panel, and they are going to give to the INC, and we will be putting their telephone numbers so they can contact them for any counseling. And this is one of the very, very, very important now, with a lot of burnout syndrome, lot of at least internationally, one of the classical example in Italy, one of the the two nurses, one nurse committed suicide, which was a positive case, and the other nurse, which happened to be the suspect nurse, and she's also committed suicide. So those are the, I think, the clinical supervisors, the nursing in charge who are there. I think they have to keep a close watch of the movements of the nursing professional who are working that unit. So that makes a lot of a difference for appropriately dealing with the. And again, one of the things with Pramila was mentioning about the right, the individual right, especially our nurses' right. In case nurse is not willing to provide work in the COVID ward, I think she has the right to say no. So that should be well respected. So that is to that extent, now the protocols have been spelled out. Next.
Dr. Pramila, it's the last question for the day we are going to take up. The other questions, I think I'll pass it on to you so that you can answer those questions. Do you identify staff nurses who are at risk in diabetes, age, and assign accordingly?
Yes. See, I think we don't, and it's also the people who are pregnant. So these group, you don't put them on the front line.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Pramila. It was nice learning today, and the other panelists also. I thank you, and I thank the participants for participating in our webinars. And I also want to inform them, please don't go with your WhatsApp, social media information. Please look into Ministry of Health and Family Welfare website, Indian Council website, ICMR website. Go to the authentic website for the information. That is why Indian Nursing Council has come with a team of nursing experts to give you the correct information. So that is why it is requested to attend the webinar. If you're not able to attend the webinar, next day on the INC website, the video which given by today's video, the whole 1.5 hours video will be available tomorrow after 1 o'clock. So please be watching our website for the correct information. Don't give the wrong information in your WhatsApp or social media. So I congratulate all our panelists. Thank you very much.
One minute, Bharti. I think I request all the participants that in case some of the because now the preparing a nursing human resource is a big challenge. So therefore training is very important. So we have to prepare our nursing human resource for this any emergency situation. Therefore, we will be very happy if we in our institution, either district hospital or wherever there were some of the principals, colleges of nursing, schools of nursing, or some of the post basic or MSc students, if they be able to bring the staff nurses who are working in the district hospital or in the community health center or in the PHC, it is welcome. So this type of a message has to be spread by our nursing educational institutions. Yes, we have to reach out to the staff nurses and in the district hospital and also in the COVID identified centers. Definitely, as Pramila said, that each COVID identified institutions, they give the specific training, but we have to prepare large number of the human resource in case emergency we have to use them. So therefore, please motivate your colleagues and your some of the staff nurses working in the district hospital or in the community health center or in the private hospitals. They should be motivated to participate in this. If they are not able to participate, at least motivate them to download these the videos and go through these videos. That will be helping.